welcome to season 3 of Lessons in Leadership. I'm pleased to have on the show today Diego Lopez, who is Managing Director of Global SWF based in New York. Diego is a true global citizen, having lived all over the world. And, you know, Diego, it's great to have you on the show today. For our listeners who maybe don't know who you are, could you just give us a quick 30-second intro as to you?
Thank you very much, Paul, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Sure, yeah. I run Global SWF, which is a financial boutique specialized in sovereign wealth funds and other institutional investors. We do consulting, we do data and research, and we do executive training for executives in sovereign wealth funds. Fabulous.
Diego, I think the first question I always ask everybody is how have you got to where you are today? What's your journey? And sort of sum that up in 2 or 3 minutes as to how you've ended up leading the organization you lead today and doing some of the interesting work you do.
Yeah, sure. So I always tell people that life is not a straight line, right? So we do a lot of, I would say, different roads and different, choices in life that take you where you are today. But basically, my objective working in finance and started in Spain back in the day was always to get to the top of finance, which was New York, obviously. But it was not a straight line. So, when I started to try and get transferred to the New York office of the consulting firm I was working at, there wasn't that possibility. So I started wandering around. I went to Qatar, I went to Hong Kong, I went to Brazil. I then left to Abu Dhabi, and then finally I reached New York. So that is always something that I tell people, like whatever the goal you have is, don't expect that it's going to be an easy road and a flat road. There's always going to be curveballs and bumps into the road, but you got to have your objective in mind and be persistent and resilient, basically.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you talk about that resilience there, and our listeners and our viewers might not necessarily know your background, Diego, and I was fascinated to learn about your background in extreme sports, and in particular your open water ice swimming, and been a world champion in that area. And for our listeners and viewers out there, Diego is author of Continent 7 Values for Sports, Business and Life Around the World. Diego, what sort of mindset lessons have you learned through your participation in extreme sports?
A lot, Paul, actually. Sports has taught me a lot that I can apply to business, and probably the other way around as well. And mostly, sports into business. I started as a regular pool swimmer when I was a kid. I mean, growing up in the Canary Islands in Spain, it's pretty normal to be a swimmer. You spend your summers in the beach. But then when I moved to Hong Kong, there was a huge group of Australian swimmers that were in love with the open waters. And I got into it. And then, the more you do it, the more you get addicted. And I started doing challenges around the world. And then that took me to New York, and that I also did some ice swimming that took me to places like Antarctica. So, and that, every race or every thing you do in sports has an application into the business world as well, especially around entrepreneurship, right? So, because again, entrepreneurship is not straightforward. It's not like being promoted at a company. There are a lot of things that you gotta consider and look after. And I think sports has definitely helped me in that process as well.
Mm-hmm. And you talked there about swimming in Antarctica. I mean, that must be fascinating. What were some of the challenges you faced there?
So the main challenge is that throughout my life, the coldest water I had experienced was 15 Celsius, right? So, or 60 Fahrenheit for those listening in the US. So, becoming an ice swimmer overnight is not an easy task. So I heard about this race happening in Antarctica and probably 2 years prior. So I had a year and a half, 2 years to prepare. And it's such a process, right? So like I tell people all the time, like, there is nothing you cannot do if you really put your mind into it. And becoming an ice swimmer was similar to me. I was really determined to do that. But I knew that they had some work that I needed to do. So, you had to train different things. You're normally used to training mileage in the pool, but for this task, I also needed to train the endurance to cold, basically. So I started sleeping with my window open in Manhattan. I started walking around in shorts in the middle of the winter. So it was a very different training, doing ice baths at home, going to Brighton Bridge in Brooklyn in the middle of winter. And it was very challenging. But again, if you're consistent with your training and you are determined with your goals, there is not really, there's nothing that you cannot really achieve. So, I had a year and a half to prepare it. I was the most prepared I could be. I was swimming against Russians, Argentinians, and East Europeans that are very used to swimming in ice. So I had a clear disadvantage, but still, I think I did a great race. I was third overall, and I became one of the very few people that have swum in Antarctica without wetsuit. So that's important to highlight. The sport of ice swimming doesn't allow you to wear any neoprene protective suit in your body. So it's just trunks, goggles, and cap. That's all.
Oh, wow. I think it's cold enough going in my local swimming pool where in winter, never mind doing it in the ice without any protection. So how do you feel that prepared you for your journey as an entrepreneur? Because you started down the corporate route in finance. You've now set your own business up as an entrepreneur. How has, some of your experiences in your journey prepared you for life as an entrepreneur?
So I always highlight an advice that I got when I was younger, which is when you're young, you have to make sure that the logo on your business card matters more than your name. So I always try to leverage, the brand of my academic training, like Alumni School of Economics, or the brand of my previous employers, like PwC. So huge brands that can, give you a better name. But once you become recognizable and sort of known in the industry that you work in, there is no point in having a logo in your business card. So that's an advice that I got a long time ago, and I thought it was spot on. So once I started becoming known in my industry, in the niche market I'm in, I just got rid of the logo. So I created my own company. It's not the first company I create. Previously, I had incorporated a company in Hong Kong while I was still a full-time employee of another company. So that's another thing that it doesn't really work when you are, trying to do something on the side, but you're still a full-time employee. That doesn't work. You have to put your whole mind into it. So that's something that I learned. So when I started Global SWF in 2018, I put my whole being into it. So my whole mind, I was waking up and thinking of that all day long. And that's the only way to succeed. Because if you got a salary, or if you got, other responsibilities and other focus, it's not going to work. So I think, basically being the best in your niche market is one. And the second one is being completely determined to succeed with your enterprise.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really solid, sound advice, Diego. I think as an entrepreneur myself, who set a business up on my kitchen table 11 years ago to grow it into an international brand today, it's really important that you give it everything and really go for it, because ultimately, if you try and do it as a side hustle, as so many people try to do, you just be an amateur at it, and your clients require you to be professional.
That's absolutely right. Yep. And especially in the business I am, I work a lot with Asia, Middle East. So the work is really 24 hours. And you got to be responsive. You got to be, dealing with a lot of moving pieces. So being focused is definitely a must.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you talked there about working 24 hours and being responsive to different time zones around the world when you work with your clients. How did COVID affect your business and your journey as an entrepreneur? What sort of curveballs did that throw at you, and how did you go about overcoming them?
So that's a good question. I mean, when COVID started, I guess for everybody it was a huge uncertainty that you cannot really prepare for. And in my business particularly, I was investing into a new business, into a new vertical, which required investments in technology, investment in new personnel. So it was a difficult moment to take risk. But I was really, I really believed in the success of the project. And also, like, I think clients that were not keen to form relationships before were suddenly more open to it online, right? So in a way, I think COVID helped my business, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. Definitely at the beginning, when there was all this uncertainty and daily calls. Here in New York, we had, Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio giving us very concerning speeches every day. It was very difficult to switch off the TV and go spend money in your business because you didn't know what was going to happen. But once I passed that threshold of coming out of my comfort zone and going into the unknown, again, just because of being determined and being believing in the thing that I was setting up, I was able to move forward. And 2 years after that, I'm very happy with where we are at the moment. And I think COVID definitely helped us in being where we are now.
And in a post-COVID world, do you find you've returned to the sort of same level with business travel now, or are you still doing more virtually, like this podcast here today?
So it's a mix, it's a blend now. I feel like a lot of people are keen to go back to in-person meetings, which is fine because you get comfortable at home, and I think you need to get out and meet people and again get out of your comfort zone. So only this year, I've been to Abu Dhabi a few times, Qatar, Saudi, Singapore, Malaysia. I'm traveling to Abu Dhabi next week, Istanbul, then Angola. So it's pretty much back to where we were, but with the benefit of working from home whenever we need to. And actually, my teams are pretty global. So I got teams in London, in Boston, and I'm setting up an office in Singapore now. And most of them work from home. So it's for an entrepreneur, I think is for an entrepreneur with a small or reduced payroll, I think it's pretty beneficial that this hybrid mode of today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and setting up a business in Singapore brings its challenges. As somebody who's done that, and our headquarters is Singapore, I know some of the legislative issues that go around doing that.
Absolutely, yeah. I was there last month dealing with all that bureaucracy, so I'm looking forward to going down the path.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've talked there quite a bit about your experiences in extreme sports entrepreneurship. When things have got tough, what's really kept you going, and what drives you forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. Things get tough pretty quickly and pretty easily, right? What I try to do is, again, having a goal in mind that will ease me through the different challenges, but also very importantly is compartmentalize, put everything into compartments. And basically, sorry about the difficult word in English, but basically, when you face a challenge, sometimes, and I'll put your example, I was swimming the English Channel, right? So between Dover and France. And it was 8 hours down. It was pretty cold. The water was probably 60, so 15 Celsius. So after 8 hours, it starts to get a burden on you, right? And I got stung by jellyfish pretty badly. I got one here, the other one here. and I was really tired. I mean, my shoulders were tired. So, if at that point, and that point where you start getting the currents from the French side, they call it the graveyard of the swimmers, because most of the people that give out their dream of swimming the English Channel do so in that particular part. So at that point, if I had got stung and I started putting everything back together with bad thoughts, like saying, well, I'm cold, I'm tired, I'm getting stung here, I'm done. So I'm done. But one thing you got to keep in mind is to try to put everything in compartments. So instead of thinking that, what I thought was, well, okay, I just got stung and that sucks. I hate it. But it's actually a beautiful day here. I've been working hard for this goal. I got an amazing crew on the boat supporting me. My wife, my friends, they were all there cheering for me. So I'm actually pretty lucky to be here. So that, positive feeling and trying to turn around the way that you think about things really helped me pursue that goal and kept going in that particular time. So I try to do the same in business. It's like, well, you get challenges all the time. Hey, we've been trying your product, but we don't like it, or we don't have the budget, so we are not going to pursue it. Hey, you do an offer to someone new, and it's like, well, yeah, I don't like the offer, so I decide to go another route. So you get challenges all the time, but if you try to think in a positive manner and see the whole picture, I think that helps you move forward and go past them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how do you motivate others as well to do the same when they're going through difficult periods?
I think it's very important to lead by example. And it sounds like a cliche, but it's totally right. I try not to tell people what they have to do, but sometimes people are wired differently. I have some staff that they don't like to they're not as commercial, so they don't like to meet clients. They prefer to be, on the technology side, and that's fine. But I try to lead by example, and once they see that you're working around the clock and putting a lot of effort, I think they just follow and they just want to support you. So that's completely that's very important when you drive a business, because you are the owner of the business, but you are also the leader, and you need people to follow you so that your business is successful. And you couldn't do that by yourself. You know it well, Paul. I mean, you gotta surround yourself by really capable and successful people as well. Otherwise, your business will not survive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I read somewhere once that you're a culmination of the 6 people that you spend the most time with, and therefore you need to choose your friends wisely and make sure you surround yourself with a good circle of influencers.
Yeah, it's a great story. Yeah.
Now, one of the things I've noticed about you and your business, Diego, is it seems quite diverse, and that you seem to have selected team members who have diverse backgrounds, but equally your client base seems quite diverse as well. Obviously within the niche of sovereign wealth funds and public pension plans. How have you gone about encouraging that and building that diversity?
Well, I think you gotta always be mindful of the cultural differences, right? So, and I think when I moved to Qatar in 2010, I mean, Qatar was still growing. It was still very underdeveloped. And one thing I try to do is to understand them rather than being the classical expat that goes to the Middle East to make some money and then leaves. And they don't have an idea of the cultural aspect of it. I try to be different and try to immerse myself into their culture. So I read a lot about Islam. I read a lot about the local cultures, local customs. So I try to be mindful of that. And then when I moved to Hong Kong, it was very similar. It was like, okay, let's immerse myself into the Chinese culture. How they think differently. And that, I think, has helped me a lot when dealing with clients. And today, as you said, I mean, I deal with clients from China, Korea, Singapore, all the way from the Middle East, Libya, UAE. So very different cultures to put together. And then Americans and Europeans, which are also wired differently, right? I'm a European based in America. So I think, again, you got to be mindful of the different aspects. You got to prepare for it. Just to put you an example, we're running an academy now. We have a London cohort and a Dubai cohort. And some of our clients prefer to send their executives to the London cohort if they are males, just because otherwise they will have to pay for chaperones. So the cost is double as much for them if they send someone to London. So these kind of things that, you know, intuitively you don't think about, they become key when trying to sell your products and to succeed. So I think that has helped me throughout my career and through my company as well.
I think you're so right, especially where you talk about cultural differences there. I've done a lot of work with US-based organizations over the years when they've set up in Europe. And those that are typically successful are the ones that really get to grips and understand the culture and understand that Europe isn't one place. There are so many that I've seen who think London is Europe, and therefore they need to do things in the way that you do in London, and that they can transpose US culture in there. And those organizations never quite work in the same way as those who truly learn about the culture and bring in people who will complement it and work with the style of the parent organization.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's key to have people on the ground that understand this as well. As you said, I mean, opening in Singapore may not have been easy, but it's necessary sometimes. And we think the same way. We have advisors in the Middle East. We have some people in Singapore, and it's completely necessary to cover all the bases.
Absolutely. What would you say are some of the most interesting projects that you've worked on?
Some of the most interesting projects. You mean in the business side or the personal side?
No, I'd say from the business side.
Yeah. Those involving different offices, multicultural experiences. I mean, I can think of many, but gosh, I'll put you an example. I was in Abu Dhabi and I was helping value the whole portfolio of assets of one of the major sovereign wealth funds there. And that involved coordinating with my whole team in the consulting firm I was at, different offices, different inputs. So it was very interesting from the point of view of the cultural aspect, but also the complexity of the deal. So it was very rewarding to see the final product coming together and the client being happy with it. I think those projects that you will remember the most are the ones that put you again out of your comfort zone and try to make you think differently. I heard the other day something that really resonates with me, which is you never remember the words, so you never remember the people. You remember the experiences, what it made you feel. So once it makes you feel out of your comfort zone, and the reward of succeeding, then you will remember that, and it will be really memorable in your book chapter.
Yeah, no, I've heard that before, and I think it was one of the Tony Robbins courses I went on early in my career where he talked about, people remember the way you made them feel. And if you made them feel bored, they're probably going to remember you as being boring. But if you took them, if you took them on a journey and you made them feel excited, then you've got much more chance of resonating with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Okay, interesting. What would you say has been the biggest leadership challenge you've faced, and how did you overcome it?
I think one of the challenges is when, again, you're put in a task that is not really in what you do normally, and it's not your call. So basically, I can remember when I was in Hong Kong, I was a mentor, a leader for a specific group of people. The decision was taken that two of those people were have to let go, basically. So I had to have that conversation, being an expat in a different world, which is Hong Kong, having a conversation with two very capable kids, but unfortunately we're not making the mark to be in our particular group. So I think that was very challenging, because you're used to be doing spreadsheets or client work and all these things, but once you are given the task of doing something different and something you're not comfortable with, that's where you have to show your leadership skills. So I took the leap and I talked to them. I tried to be mindful again of the cultural aspect and walk them through the process, and then support them after in the afterlife, after the consulting work firm we were at. So again, leadership is a very subjective skill, and you gotta show it in different aspects. But I think when you're really doing something new and something out of the blue that you did not expect, and you act in your own instinct, then is where you really show it the most.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, coming back to the work you do with institutional investors, I mean, as you will know, a lot of the listeners to this podcast work in the institutional investment space. What do you think are the opportunities in institutional investment at the moment?
So it's a very interesting world, to be honest. I'm very happy that I got involved in it in the first place, because it's, you look at it from an economics point of view, but also from a financial point of view, and you will always have the politics element to it. So, at the end of the day, it's the intersection between governments and finance. And the industry is evolving very rapidly. If you think about the sovereign wealth fund industry, the sovereign wealth fund, the first sovereign wealth fund is claimed to be born in 1953, but the term sovereign wealth fund was not really born until 2005. So if you think about it, it's only it's less than a 20-year old industry that evolves very rapidly according to the resources, according to the financial markets, but also the changes in government, right? So I've heard before that the only reason that sovereign wealth funds succeed, the most number of sovereign wealth funds that you see succeeding are those that do not change the government over time, because they have a stable leadership. And I've heard that America and Europe cannot really have sovereign wealth funds because they're changing leadership and goals every 4 years. But the reality is that they are always faced with different challenges, even those with stable leadership. And it's an industry that keeps evolving. So this year, as you know, the financial markets are down in every single asset class, from fixed income and public equities to real estate and hedge funds. So sovereign wealth funds have had to adapt themselves very rapidly, and they're all thinking, hey, what should we do? Where should we hide in this environment? But they do have the luxury of the long term, right? So they can think long term. They're saying, well, our returns should not be targeted for next year, but to 20 years from now. So that allows them to make the shift more smoothly, if you will. Yeah.
Did you always intend to work in finance, or is it something you fell into by accident?
I was always good with numbers. I always loved the numbers component. I was about to be an engineer, to be honest, when I started my studies. But then suddenly I decided to do economics. And I always had this dream of, working in high profile finance. I remember with barely 12 or 13 years old, walking around in Madrid, coming from the island. Well, being in Madrid, it was like, wow, mind blowing. And my father pointing to the stadium of soccer or football of Real Madrid. And I was not looking at it. I was looking at the towers of the financial city. And I was like, hey, Dad, I'm going to work there one day. So he was surprised because, I was just a kid and I knew nothing about finance or anything. But that's the dream I had, and I kept pursuing it until I made it. So I actually lived and worked in those towers in front of the Real Madrid Stadium. And from there, I dreamed of going into New York City, which I did as well.
Lovely. I always ask that question because it's fascinating how people ended up where they are. I mean, I fell into this industry, completely by accident, and many people do. But it's interesting to see those that actually planned and wanted to work in it as well. Yeah,
it's fascinating, especially with kids, right? When you ask kids what do they want to do, and some of them ask like firemen or policemen, very few would tell you investment bankers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd have been the kid with the football at the Real Madrid stadium.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, I just wasn't that talented at football.
Right. Yeah, me neither.
So our next question is going to come from our last guest on the podcast, which is Simon Jeffries.
Hi, this is Simon Jeffries. I was on the last Lessons in Leadership chat, and so I've got this question for you. So the question is, how did your 18-year-old self view the world, and how has that changed for you now?
That's a great question. I mean, sometimes you got to think, how would you speak to your 18-year-old self? I can envisage myself being so different and so naive. What I would tell myself is just keep reading, keep educating yourself, keep learning about your external parties, keep getting out of your comfort zone, and do try to do things differently and new. But he would have probably never imagined traveling so much and seeing so many things, and having a life that is not what the social norm tells you to, right? So I think that's a very important advice too. When you're 18 and a lot of people tell you, hey, you gotta go to college, you gotta get a job, you gotta get a house, get married, have 2 kids, that's it. Well, sometimes life is not as standard, and don't be afraid of being different. Don't be afraid of doing things differently. That's something that I would tell myself at any point in my life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. Okay, cool. Diego, thank you very much for being on the show today. It's been a pleasure to have you with us. And for all our viewers and listeners out there, if you've enjoyed the show, we would really love it if you could like, comment, and share. And as a little incentive, Diego has promised us a signed copy of his book for one of our listeners or viewers. So if you comment, and we will pick a winner at random and send you a signed copy of Diego's book.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Paul. It's been a pleasure to be here, and very happy to follow up with any questions.
Lovely. Thank you.